This is by far the most difficult snapper pass video I have ever done because this card is so incredibly difficult to evaluate. I could see Pixie being one of the best cards in the game after tomorrow, or possibly one of the worst. It's really going to go both ways, and it is the start of the season, so everyone's playing bot, so it's probably going to have a high win rate out the gate, but it is snapper pass time with old Drewberry. We got to talk about some counters, some deck lists, and I got in the mechanical section of this video, I've got a little detailed explanation example of what's going to happen when you actually play Pixie and how the costs are actually going to swap. So it's a bit of a visual understanding of her ability. So what does she do? She is a 2/1 on reveal. Shuffle the cost of all cards in your deck. That started there. Very important note there. We're going to get to what actually qualifies as starting in your deck in just a minute. But first, of course, we got to talk about the spotlight caches. And I gotta say, I think it's a bit weak this time around. We got two Series 4 cards. Now, Pixie herself is a Series 5 release. She's going to cost you 6,000 tokens should you choose to use that currency on this card. But these other two, well, they're only going to cost you 3,000 apiece. Now, they are pretty good cards. They find themselves in quite a few decks every now and then, but they're not exactly necessary, I would say. Like, they're kind of cuttable options, tech options that you could throw into the deck. They do work very well with Pixie, though. So you could build a deck with all these cards and it's going to probably work out for you, but I don't know, dude. I'd like to use my tokens on Series 4 rather than spotlight caches. So for me, it's a bit of a difficult week. And then if the variants are your style, it's your style. So go for it if you feel like you got to go for it. But for me, spotlight caches are a pass. But is the card Pixie a snap or a pass? Well, let's learn more about it in the mechanics. All right, so let's start with how does this card actually shuffle the costs in your deck, right? Because we haven't quite seen this before. I think the closest thing for Pixie is Mr. Negative, but he just flips and you know exactly what's going to happen. With the shuffling, I think what a lot of people are getting mixed up, myself included until I got developer confirmation, is that it's not swapping. It's not swapping. It's not looking at two cards and swapping their costs and then it's going to do that. Let's say that there's 10 cards in there. It's going to do that 5 times over. No, it's actually just going to create a list of all the cards and it's going to randomly reassign a cost. So one card will do a check, pick a cost. The other card will do a check, pick a cost. My understanding is that it won't double up. So it's not like if you got Wasp in your deck, there's going to be like 2 cards that are going to grab Wasp's cost. No, once it's used up, that's expired from the list and it'll pull from whatever else. So the example that I have in a minute is going to showcase this a little bit better, but let's look at, what can happen, what cards do qualify and what cards don't. So cards with the same cost do have the potential to swap with each other. So if you're trying to be clever and you just throw Wasp into your deck and you got a bunch of 6 costs and you're like, well, I'll guarantee that one of my 6 costs will be 0. I guess in that situation it would work, but you're going to have a lot of 6 costs swapping 6 for 6, 6 for 6. So you got to watch out, especially if you're trying to put Wasp and Yellow Jacket in the deck. They actually might swap costs with one another and you'll never get a card that has a 0 cost. Like one of those 6 drops being 0. So it's kind of like difficult to deck build because it's not as simple as just putting cheap and high cost stuff. In fact, in my deck building theory crafting, I think one of the best ways to use Pixie is to have a lot of cheap stuff and like 1 or 2 high cost, high value power plays. 2 cards that are going to carry you through the game. And then you can almost guarantee that when you play Pixie, they're going to shuffle their cost to something cheaper. Unless they like a very low percentage chance that they swap with each other, you're going to have a lot of 1 cost, a lot of 0 cost, a lot of 2 costs to make those cards discounted, which is going to be great. Another one I've seen a lot of people talk about is Thanos, the Infinity Stones. It happens at the start of the game. So they actually are not in your deck when the game starts. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but it does not. It's been confirmed by Glenn that the Infinity Stones will not work with Pixie. There's like 2 different starts of the game, I suppose. You could almost look at it like the cards that you brought when you queued versus a start of game mechanic. So Infinity Stones are off the table to be shuffled. Not saying that Thanos wouldn't work, it just means that all the other cards that you brought to the table would shuffle instead. And then you got the evolved cards. Now, this one to me is a little bit straightforward. You're not going to actually have cards joining your deck. It's what you queued in with. You queued in with Cyclops, Hulk, whatever else into the game. So they're available to shuffle, even though their text has changed. It's almost like using Sauron to eliminate the text from the cards in your deck and then playing Pixie afterwards. She's still going to shuffle those cards. Like, you brought those cards in the game in your queue. Just because their text has changed does not mean they're not available to swap. So just to clarify, high evolutionary evolved cards will be affected by Pixie. This also does not change their base cost. So let's say you have Zabu out on the board and you draw Iron Lad, and Iron Lad swapped with Hulk. So now he's a 6/6. That sucks, but actually he's going to go down to 5 because Zabu is on the board. Zabu doesn't care if he's a 6 now. He's reading as a base 4 cost card, so he'll get discounted further slightly. This could be relevant in a few situations, but it might be tricky to try and put a deck together that's taking advantage of Pixie and further cheap discounting cards. Maybe even Sarah, though. Like I was saying, one of those high value cards that you want discounted to be cheap, you throw out Sarah, do some crazy things. I don't know. There's possibilities there. Now, here is an example, okay? So we're going to start it off with the starting deck. Now, this is just a random deck that I threw together, okay? So you just got varying costs. That's what I wanted to divvy up the deck with, just varying costs of cards. On turn 2, we're going to play Pixie. We drew Pixie by turn 2. That's fantastic. I think earlier the better. And we're going to play Pixie. And the 4 cards in our hand are Angela, Stegoron, Nightcrawler, Magneto. Irrelevant. We don't care about them. We care about what's left in the deck. In this situation, it's Wasp, Yellow Jacket, Nebula, Scarlet Witch, Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Hulk. All these cards, 7 of them, are going to swap cost. Now notice how it's an odd number. It's because they're not actually, oh, I even said it myself, they're not swapping costs, they're shuffling costs. It's a weird terminology change, but as you will see, here we go when they do the actual shuffle. So Wasp shuffled with Hulk, became a 6/1. Yellow Jacket swapped, oh shoot, Yellow Jacket shuffled with Wasp. I really got to watch my terminology here. It became a 0/2, which didn't change anything, but it was available because they're the same cost. It doesn't matter. Just looks for a card to shuffle with. Nebula shuffled with Spider-Man, became a 3/1. Scarlet Witch with Nebula became a 1/3. And then Spider-Man with Scarlet Witch became a 2/5. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. Your higher power play cards. Iron Man, fortunately, shuffled with Yellow Jacket, so it became a 0/0. That's pretty good Iron Man, if I do say so myself. And then Hulk was guaranteed to get discounted. He went to a 5/12. That was technically the low roll, but it didn't matter because Hulk was the only 6 cost card in the game, so we knew 100% that his cost was going to be discounted. And I think that in lies one of the greatest strengths in Pixie, is that you can, if you only have one 6-drop in the deck, hopefully in the deck by the time you coming around to, playing Pixie, you're going to discount it one way or another. Now, are you going to draw it is where it gets a little bit difficult. I hope this made sense. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. It's a bit tricky, but just think of it as a list that it makes, and it pulls one at a time. And there you go. You got your shuffle. You got your shuffle on, not your swap, your shuffle. I got to watch myself. All right. So let's get back to the pros and cons of Pixie. So some of the pros, man, like I was saying, those power play cards, even if they're discounted just by 1 all the way down to free, that's amazing. That's gonna be good. I think deck building is gonna get a bit dicey. It's gonna be really curious to see what people come up with in the first few days. But when this settles, there's probably gonna be 1 or 2 decks that's gonna be very strong. It's also a new fun deck build around card. We haven't really seen something that makes a huge splash to create its own deck archetype in a while, I find there's things like Mr. Negative that can kind of do that. And I think Pixie is going to be one of those cards, which makes her really fun to have in your collection. I just hate how expensive she is. And then another one is the unforeseeable amount of power on the final turn. Your opponent's going to have no clue how your swaps, not your swaps, your shuffles went. Oh my gosh, your shuffles. So they might be thinking, geez, they played Pixie. They haven't played much. It's turn 6. What do they got? You might have the nuts. You might have that Iron Man Hulk that's going to put out 24 power in a lane. Who knows, dude? You might have some crazy plays, or you might not. So there's almost some interesting decisions coming with snapping on turn 5 or 6 or whatever it may be. Some bluffs potentially. We'll see. But the cons really have me nervous about this card, okay? Because it's all nice and rainbows and sunshine when you look at what could happen for those big power plays. But then there's these factors. So the stat line. 2/1 is one of the worst stat lines we have seen in a long time. Grandmaster actually takes the cake. He has the worst stat line. But 2/1, there's not a lot of cards. If you look at 2 drops and you look at the power, output that they provide. There's really only a couple of cards like Morbius, who gains power anyways, Havoc, who gains power anyways, and then there's like Pixie and Grandmaster, and there's Bucky Barnes, he gets destroyed, hopefully. So it's a really bad spot to be with power output. Glenn even said himself, cards with power tend to do better. So yeah, you gotta look out. Not to say that this won't work out. I mean, we've seen Mr. Negative have a terrible stat line and be a good deck. So I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just a factor, right? It's a bit of a tempo loss. Then there's the RNG. You got to draw Pixie on time, hopefully early enough before you draw those cards that you do want to swap. And then not swap, shuffle. And then you do the shuffle and it's going to shuffle around and you hope it's a good shuffle. If it's not a good shuffle, by the time you draw some of those cards, it might be worse than what they were before. You might dilute your draws. Those turn 4, 5, 6 crucial draws might be those cards I was showing earlier, like a 6/1 Wasp. That's not great. Now, there's ways we can mitigate that, but obviously still not ideal. Okay, so Deck Tracker is definitely going to help out a ton. All right, so that's the mechanics for the card. Of course, let me know in the comments below any questions you got. Let's move on to some counters. All right, this is what I got cooking for the counters. So Cosmo, of course, the dog, got to put it in here because Pixie has an on reveal. So immediate counter. Mobius, one of her greatest allies, but also one of her greatest enemies. Because if Mobius is on the other side, well, then all your cards are not going to be discounted and they're going to still have that heavy toll. Like if that Wasp became a 6/1, it's going to be a 6/1, and that's going to suck. And then you got Sandman, right? We're trying to discount a bunch of cards so that they're cheap, and then we play them probably on the final turn, a bunch of them. Well, if Sandman's out, then who cares if that Magneto is now a 0? You're only playing that one Magneto. And then there's Black Widow. If you really want to start drawing to get to those cards after you make a Pixie play, well, the Widow's Bite is going to deny at least one of those draws, and then you're really hoping that you draw one of those good cards later on. Baron Mordo, man. Baron Mordo is actually a counter. Look at this guy. His time to shine. Not really, but it's kind of neat because let's say you shuffled that Magneto to being a 0 cost. Well, Baron Mordo might make you draw it and then bring it back to a 6. That would be epic. That would be just legendary Hall of Fame Mordo play. And then Black Bolt, of course, because if you do draw that Magneto and you're trying to be real greedy and keep it in your hand, well, Black Bolt could make you discard it because it is now the cheapest costing thing in your hand. Not that Wasp. That Wasp is nice and expensive, 6/1. But that Magneto being 0 cost, yeah, he's at target. You got to look out for some of those, but really ultimately not too bad, I would say. Not too popular, some of these, but they might pop up in the next week because this is going to be so popular, right, with the new season. So you got to look out. All right, let's get to the decks. Let's go. So it's a pretty fun card to theory craft with, and this is what I've come up with. I've already talked about some of the synergies. I would say the only ones that I haven't is Jane Foster, right? You can draw those 0 costs if they did shuffle to be 0s, hopefully the good ones anyway. Then you got Goose, because now if that Magneto is a 0 cost, then you can play him at a Goose location, which is just epic, and then your opponent can't do much. Then there's also Adam Warlock. The new 5/4 Adam Warlock. Man, hear me out. Hear me out. You can make this guy maybe a 1/4, 2/4, 3/4 even, and then play him and draw more cards to get to your other shuffled cards. I think it's kind of legit. Could actually help out. Of course, if you're winning the location. Anyways, here's what I came up with. So shuffle and pray. I think this is the most common, or at least seems to be what everyone's gravitating to. And that is basically have some cheap stuff, have some expensive stuff, and do a wombo combo. And I gotta say, I kind of like it. I mean, the way this backfires is if those 6 costs shuffle with one another. But we have magic to extend the game, so we have turn 6 and 7 to play 1 each respectively. We have Wasp and Yellow Jacket to hopefully make one of them free. And ultimately, it's just going to make a crazy shift in power. Like you do that Iron Man Onslaught Living Tribunal combo, that is the nut. And then you add Adam Warlock on there just to make sure you draw it. This could be legit. Jane Foster to drop. Man, I could see this actually popping off. So I think that's going to be a pretty strong deck. Straight up, just playing Pixie on 2, Mobius on 3, and then eventually Jane Foster on 5 just seems good enough. to make this super consistent. You're going to draw through your whole deck with this. I think that's kind of nuts. Then we got Evolved Pixie. I don't know about this one, but this is what I made as an example. If you have a lot of cheap things and you just want to make sure that Hulk or Doctor Doom becomes super, super cheap, I think you could even cut Doctor Doom for another cheap card to ensure that your Hulk becomes like a 4 or 2 or 1 cost card, which is nuts in the high evolutionary package when you're trying to do some unspent energy shenanigans. Get this guy to being like a 120. Oh my gosh, guys, get out of here. That'd be insane. So that's basically the idea. Bunch of cheap stuff and then discounting those big swing cards for that final turn. And even Shang-Chi would be nice to have a 1/3 Shang-Chi. Let's go. And lastly, I like this deck a lot. I think this would be pretty fun. Same idea, okay? Same idea of having only a few high-end cards. Oh, weirdly enough, I got Wong and Iron Man mixed up. But anyways, you got a lot of cheap things. And then you got Iron Man, Spectrum, Wong as our, higher end. High value, big power play. And if they get swapped with like Ant-Man, Quinjet, Howard, Ebony Maw, especially Ebony Maw, we really only have them in here because they're ongoing cards and they benefit from a Spectrum buff and they're cheap. So they can swap with Iron Man, swap with Spectrum, and then we can play like Iron Man, Spectrum on Wong, whatever else. Buff all these cards up. We're just not going to be able to probably play those cheap cards, but we have Mobius and he has an ongoing tag, which is amazing. So you got him out there. He can get the benefits from the Spectrum play and make all those Howard and Quinjet and whatever cheap again. I think this could be pretty legit. I think it could be fun. Man, when I look at all these decks, I see a lot of potential. But again, I just don't know if this is such a boom or bust card. It's impossible for me to tell you guys like that this is the one. Like I've been wrong before and I'd be happy to be wrong about this card. I just have no idea. So with that in mind, is this card a snap or a pass? Now, occasionally, I've kind of given the wait and see approach, but you guys want the answer. I'll give you the answer. In my opinion, I think Pixie is a pass. I think there's a little bit too much randomness, a little bit of RNG to be consistent enough, and she's expensive. Honestly, that's what it comes down to me. I have only been buying the season passes for the last few months, so I don't have a lot of resources. I'm trying to manage my resources to get the cards that I really want, that are most exciting to me. And there's 1 or 2 this month that are more exciting, and there's a lot next month that I'm more excited for. So for me, I gotta make the call and pass on Pixie. But of course, if you're interested in this type of deck, you're really excited about this card, I think it's a good one to go for with tokens. Unfortunately, the spotlights are a bit weak. Even if you don't own the cards, I would rather maybe save up tokens for them. I don't know. It's a tough judgment call. It's based on what you got in your collection. But for me, I'm gonna go with Pixie being a pass, and I think she's gonna do okay. And I don't know, dude. She's such a tough one to evaluate. We'll see. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun to find out. It's gonna be a crazy week. Anyways, let me know what you think about Pixie in the comments below. If there's anything that I missed, if you're excited about her, any deck list that you got brewing up, some combinations, I want to hear about it. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I will catch you guys next time.